I talked about this a little bit last night with Casey about the article, kind of the things that jumped out to me. The one, what did you think of the part about where they made it seem like Stefanski really didn't communicate the change of play caller aspects? Where like I guess they had one player quoting saying the first he heard about it was like in the press conference, and then or in the other guy noticed it was at practice. Um, he never like actually like got up in front of the team and was like, "Listen, we're changing this." Did you
Yeah, I
find that
wonder.
odd?
Yeah, my thought is like, I wonder how normal that is, right? Because we think of it,
Yeah,
it's a big deal for us as fans to know who the play caller is, because like a lot of sports talk centers around who to blame, and a lot of times you blame the play caller for whatever happens with the offense. But I wonder, like, if inside an actual like building, do
yeah,
they really care who's calling the plays all like that? Like, is it like probably like six people who really care who's calling the plays on the offense or defensive side of the ball? So I just wonder if that's just not normal. Like, it's just maybe it's part of the normal operations. Be like, all right, well, we're switching play callers. That was
yeah,
kind of an internal coaching decision, and you figure that out when you figure that out. But yeah, I don't know how that's normally handled. I try not
yeah,
to read too much into stuff like that, because it's very easy to overread into that, because we're kind of projecting what we feel like into that situation. So I didn't really take too much away from that part of the article about the switching to play call things. I thought it was interesting, like when they mentioned that. Well, I think the unnamed source said that was
yeah,
actually like a good thing that Stefanski does. Like, that was the part that jumped off to me, was like, whoever they interviewed,
yeah,
like, is head over heels with Stefanski.
yeah,
And like, it does not seem like he has come close to losing this locker room. Like, I know that was a big concern at a certain point. It doesn't seem
yeah,
like it's come close to that. And I actually wonder if people got the read on the Miles thing wrong, because they kind of allude to it in that article where they say people kind of interpreted it as Miles giving them an ultimatum. I wonder if that was Miles saying, hey, we're not rebuilding, which means we're not firing Kevin Stefanski, right? Like,
yeah.
we're not going to do that. Which would make sense, because he's always kind of supported the decisions that Stefanski's made publicly.
Yeah, there's a quote in there from Miles that was very pro. It was like, "We trust these guys got it," type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then to your point, there was, they made it in the article. They pointed out they were like Stefanski's voice has not grown stale
Mm-hmm.
despite the losing. You know what I mean? Um,
Now, I've
yeah,
been giving Andy Dickerson a lot of slack, because like, I don't know what he's
we
been
don't know.
responsible
Yeah,
for and what, like, how much he's done. But I do find it interesting that a couple days ago we find out from Ian Rappaport that Mike Vrabel had been
yeah,
helping out with the offensive line duties. And then we read this article, and one of the things kind of flies under the radar, that Kevin is helping out with the
he's in
offensive
the
line
room.
doing.
Yep.
Yeah. So I want, like, part of this might just be that was, outside of quarterback, the obvious biggest problem this team had to deal with. And you can argue the crisis point of the team, right?
Yeah.
Because you kept having injuries throughout the year. Like, there's not much you can adjust when Deshaun just stinks, right? But there's a lot you can try to think you can adjust with this offensive line, because it's supposed to be really good. So that tells me internally that's what caught them off guard the most, is the failure of this offensive line. I think that's why there was so much of a hesitancy to kind of throw the burden of all of this on Deshaun Watson, because you could
Yeah.
just tell by where these resources were allocated. We're talking about Mike Vrabel and the head coach of the Cleveland Browns that everybody is still behind, right? Those are
Yep.
the two guys that are running to that offensive line room trying to figure out a solution here. And they could not get it done. I mean, obviously, it got better a little bit when Jameis was out there, but that
Mhm.
had a lot to do with how Jameis navigates the pocket. And he had Jermaine Ifedi playing left tackle. It's only so much you could do from a coaching standpoint. But
Yeah.
I did find it interesting. Like, that's where the resources went, which tells me, okay, maybe that's where they felt like was the nucleus of a lot of the issues that this offense had this year.
I definitely think that that's the case, because regardless of who it is, right? Who plays quarterback for the Browns in 2025, it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be it's not going to be an all-world player. It's either going to be a bridge veteran or a rookie. So going into 2025, you have to it is an absolute must that you surround him with a run game and better offensive line play.
I do think there's an interesting conversation to be had here, right? Because I've made this point. The Browns are going to have to find a way to win games without a franchise quarterback.
Yes.
But is that really different than what they've had to
No.
do and done before, right? Like they haven't had a franchise quarterback.
No.
I mean, at any point since coming back since 1999. And they, with Kevin and AB, they've been able to win 11 games twice.
Yes.
And it's interesting how it feels so much more difficult this year just because you don't have the hope that Deshaun Watson is going to save you. But
Mhm.
I wonder if not relying on that hope that Deshaun Watson's going to turn into 2020 guy and it's all going to click is actually going to put him in a better position to build a better team and offense this offseason, because I think they really thought he was going to come back from that injury after that Baltimore game and continue to go on the, he was on a slight upward trajectory when he went out, right?
Oh, for
So,
sure. Yeah.
I think they thought he was going to continue that, and that didn't happen. And now they're like focusing their efforts on all these other things. I expect them to go pretty hard at offensive line in
Yes.
free agency. It feels like Joe Bitonio is going to retire.
It does.
Tackle, you need to get some solutions there because with Dewan's coming off that tibia and he came into a camp overweight last year, so you can't really rely on him. You can never really rely on Jack Conklin. I expect them to be players in free agency with some of these tackles. Like Dan Moore's probably a name they're going to have to bring over. Maybe even look at guard if they're not fully there yet with Zach Zinter. But this is the whole left side of this offensive line. I anticipate being new next year.
Center too.
Yeah, like from the center on to the left.
Yeah.
I think they're going to have to replace that whole flank of the line. Maybe they'll keep Wyatt Teller because you want to keep some continuity on that line. But
yeah,
they're going to have to replace a lot this offseason at the offensive line. And I'm like, that's what they're going to want to take care of before they get to the draft, because this draft does not have day one solutions at the offensive line in the way that you would want it to. And the Browns have been pretty good about taking best player available when they go up the pick, which is, we'll get to a conversation about quarterback later on tonight. So I think that's going to factor heavily into whatever they do. But reading that article, I was like, okay, the offensive line is definitely going to be the first point of emphasis. I've never seen a more obvious move that either Kirk Cousins is going to play here or he's going to retire next year, right?
Yep.
It's like Kirk Cousins is going to be here, and then I wouldn't count out Jacoby Brissett finding his way over here too, right?
Yep.
Like I think they're going to have a number of guys here just in case to play quarterback here, and I wouldn't be surprised if they technically carry 3 all season or maybe even 4.
Yeah. I think they have to. If it's gonna be the approach of Cousins, then bringing in a guy like Brissett makes a ton of sense, and even some projects maybe like whoever you want to take a shot on. Interesting, they mentioned like Kyle Trask in the article.
That was an interesting one, and I was like, oh, that's gonna definitely come up again, right? Because that doesn't just float out for no reason.
Right.
I had it written down, my notes on listening to that article. I was like, okay, so it's Jacoby Brissett, it's Kyle Trask, and it's Kirk Cousins. And I'm not sure if Kyle Trask is not number one on that list for them, right? Like that's definitely something that they're gonna look into. Like, okay, let's bring somebody in who can play, maybe even take the job, young guy, with some tools. They like him in that offense. Hasn't been able. He was a second-round pick.
So you're watching Things I Think I Know on the OBR streaming network. That's Quincy Carrier. I'm Brad Ward. Before we get into the quarterbacks, you mentioned the Dorsey thing. I want to hit on this one more time. How much did you find it interesting? Another point of interest today, or yesterday, pardon me. Tommy Reese talking about praise for Mike Vrabel. We know Mike Vrabel is going to go get a job somewhere. How much you want to bet Mike Vrabel takes Tommy Reese with him?
Yeah, there seems to be a little bit of a war between like all these New England guys and Tommy Reese. I don't know what the connection is there. Like I have to look into his history. It doesn't seem like outside what if he was at Alabama last year. So maybe Nick Saban's like really high on this guy because there's kind of a connection there with Saban and Bill Belichick, and there's the connection there with Bill Belichick and Mike
North
Vrabel.
Carolina.
So
Yeah.
there might be something there with Tommy Reese that they like about him and how he operates. I think he's going to have his choice of options because I think if the Browns move on from Ken Dorsey, they're probably, if they can't get like Clint Kubiak, which they could just very well just get Clint Kubiak. If they can't get Clint Kubiak, then they're probably just going to go, okay, let's just promote Tommy Reese to offensive coordinator and call it a day there. Because also if you're Mike Vrabel, Tommy Reese isn't a guy you promote to be your offensive coordinator if you're Mike Vrabel, because Mike needs more of an established guy to kind of sell that image of him. Even though, to give Mike credit, he's done good picking his offensive coordinators. I mean, Arthur Smith, and then before that was Matt LaFleur. That was his guy down there. So he's done a pretty good job. So, I mean, like if Mike's saying like he wants to take this guy with him, if you're the Browns, you should probably just snake him and say, hey, no, that's going to be our offensive coordinator.
No.
But
you think it's you think that the writing is on the wall for Dorsey?
It feels like it, right? Like a part of the reason I feel like Jameis got benched was to kind of nerf some of the offensive numbers that they were putting up with like Ken and his offense. Like it feels like there's been like, I'm not a big conspiracy guy, but everything that's happened in the back half of this season with the offense has been like exceedingly weird. Like why did DTR play? We know what that looks like. It looks no different than it looked last year. It is like it doesn't feel like they were overtly trying to tank when they made the move. I think I don't know what they're trying to do there. Like there's just so many unanswered questions about how they operated this year. Like I expect what's his name? The Zap man to go in there, look a little bit better than DTR, because at least he's demonstrated that he can stay above water in the NFL. So much is weird has gone on with Ken Dorsey, and like I don't think it's his fault. I don't think Ken's a bad offensive coordinator. It's just one, he kind of got that stench on him because he was the guy that everybody associated with the fixed Deshaun Watson guy. And Deshaun Watson looked way worse than anybody has ever seen him. And then like he got tagged with the guy who ruined Josh Allen, when I don't even think that's a fair tag that they put on him, because Josh Allen became Josh Allen under Ken Dorsey. Like this, like he didn't ruin him. He might have rolled him too hard, but that was partly the fault of the coaching staff entirely in Buffalo. They were riding Josh Allen too hard, like the general manager and everybody else. Like that's the only way they can win games. So man, I've never seen anybody get more of a bad rap. I mean, Ken Dorsey has had a bad rap like literally like his entire public football career, because he's the dude who lost with that Miami team, right? Like he's that guy who lost to Ohio State with that Miami team, and then he got injured, and then he cried after he got injured, and then like people made a big deal about that. And then like he finally gets something going for himself. He gets Josh Allen, and then like he gets blamed for ruining Josh Allen. And then now he's here in like the worst year to become the offensive coordinator of the Cleveland Browns and then take over play calling, right? Like at the worst time to take over play calling for the Cleveland Browns. So raw deal, but like, hey man, the vibes are bad there with Ken. And I think there's some things that they're going to retain that Ken Dorsey brought to this offense. Because like, I don't think the offense is bad. Like Jerry Jeudy's looked really good in it. Like they've been able to get up and down the field pretty well. And when the quarterback's not making crazy decisions, when Jameis wasn't doing crazy stuff, it looked pretty good.
It was explosive for
at least the pass game part of it, right? Now, I think the issue that Ken has is that the run games with him have never been strong. And then he leaves Buffalo, and James Cook, who we all thought was garbage while he was there, turns into one of the best running backs
Amazing.
in the NFL.
Yeah.
Like, it's another problem that he has. And like I look at Jerome Ford, I'm like, that dude's gonna go to like San Francisco or Miami, somewhere where he doesn't really have to see that
Yeah.
well and just like run straight. And like we're gonna be like, oh my God, why do we let Jerome Ford go? Right.
Yeah.
Because I just don't think they have a good feel for this run game, and it's gotten worse. So I think they're going to switch to somebody who knows kind of the basis of what Kevin wants to do and can marry that system, has more overlap with Kevin, and also who can add wrinkles to this run game that I think they desperately feel like they need to improve. And Ken's just not the guy that's going to make your run game better.
I get that. I couldn't agree more about the run game. And it's been progressively getting worse
Mm-hmm.
last year to this year,
I think
and nobody could find answers this year. It's not like anybody was able to identify like, oh, we can do this or we can do that, or to your point, the resources that they, you know, Vrabel and your head coach are in the offensive line room. They're trying to figure it out.
well,
Nobody could really put it. Yeah.
and another thing to think about, right? Like, because I think the Browns were aware of this when they brought in
Oh yeah.
Ken, to be fair. And they were like, okay, Ken's not the strongest run game guy. But I think the reason they had so many procedural issues getting this offense up and running is because Ken couldn't really, they didn't trust Ken with the run game. They hired like 3 different run game coordinators. Like,
Yep.
Andy Dickerson was a run game coordinator in Seattle.
Charlton.
Yeah. And then who's the guy? What's his name again from Connecticut?
Charlton.
Yeah, Nick Charlton. And then it's part of what Tommy Reese is here
Yeah.
doing, right? And it's like, oh, I can see where there's too many, because like offensive coordinator and head coach, it's not too many cooks in the kitchen. It's like the normal amount. It's a head chef and a sous chef, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
normal amount that it takes to cook in the kitchen. But when you
Yeah.
got this person working on only the onions, and then this guy's working on just like peeling, it's just too much going on there. And I
Yeah.
think that is the problem that Ken Dorsey brings, is that, yeah, he might give you some really good stuff in the passing game, but his liabilities in the run game, I feel like, have made them have to make all of these different hires and changes to their structure that has taken them so far away from being streamlined that they can't get the play call in right, like, or they can't get set before the line of scrimmage, on the line of scrimmage before the play starts. And I think Ken's probably gonna have to go. It's a bad rap for him, but he just isn't the right man for this time. I think you probably got to move on, look for other people. And when I watch Clint Kubiak, if he's available, and did they already fire the coach? Yeah, I think they did.
Yes.
The Saints
Yes.
already fired Dennis
Yeah.
Allen. So if
Yeah, they
Kubiak
got
becomes available,
their crazy special teams coach. He's wild. That
yeah,
one dude is wild. Yeah.
yeah.
Has
So
taken over as the interim. So it's interesting because you hear that there is a good working relationship between Stefanski and Dorsey. Before this article, I was kind of up in the air on what would happen with the staff, but this article kind of does change the way you look at it a little bit. Like, man, you get a feeling from it like Dorsey might be the odd man out here, especially if this involves Cousins, like we are hearing so much, right? And the other names you mentioned as well, all guys that would probably require them to lean more back into the Stefanski's offense, and it needs to be an evolved version of that, of course, but yeah, so it'll be interesting. Pete is real high on Dorsey and what he's done here with the pass game, and you wonder if they would find a way to keep him just for the pass game, but he's been an OC in multiple places, called plays in multiple places. He probably could get a job someplace else. I don't know.
well, I think they've been keeping him around just for the past stuff. I think that's the problem. It's just not working because too many people trying to do one job. Like another name that got mentioned, right? Roy Ivistan, right? He
Yes.
was trying to implement some stuff that he saw while he was in Philadelphia. Again, we're hearing like all of these names pop up around like the run game and the offensive line that aren't Andy Dickerson. To me,
Yes.
that's got to be concerning, right? Like what has happened to Andy Dickerson? Is he just not doing well, or is he doing the run game stuff, right? Like, is the alignment of coaches just not what we think it is based on what it's listed as the website? I don't
Yeah.
think I don't think the job titles have been accurate. I think things have changed so much throughout the year, and they've switched responsibilities, and because they don't announce these things to everybody, which like they have the right to do. Because like I imagine if you're a player and you hear, oh, we're switching this coach to here, and there, just the perception of that could be troubling, right?
Yeah.
So you probably want to keep some of that stuff away from everybody. But yeah, it's just you hear all these names being thrown in on like what they're doing with the offensive line, what they're doing with the run game. And it strikes me as a team that like really struggled protection wise. It really struggled run game wise to figure out answers, and they were searching for them. And that's to me where I look at like Ken, I'm like, that's been a known problem with Ken, right?
Yeah.
Like he's going to put you in 5 and empty, right?
Yeah.
And that's been a known problem with how the Browns how offenses like that have operated. It's part of the reason why we always beat the Bengals, and the Bengals switched up from that, right?
Yep.
So that is one of those things in that article where I'm like, okay, they're not saying it, right? Daniel's not writing it in that article, but you could just read read in between the lines here of like, hey, this guy's here, that guy's here. Remember, you heard about Mike Vrabel potentially being there. Yeah, that's a huge takeaway from me where I'm like, okay, there was a problem in the trenches here.
Yes. And you mentioned the Roy Isfan, who comes from, working with the other guru of the NFL. If it's not Bill Callahan, it's the guy in Philly. His name is escaping me right now. But he's worked with him. He was been his assistant for years and years. So he's a very intelligent guy. And you may have pointed this out the first time on this same show when we were talking about Hard Knocks, that it was Istvan up in front of the O-line room on Hard Knocks, not Dickerson.
Yeah, we've not seen Dickerson with the offensive line, which again,
where is he? Yeah.
He was a run game coordinator in Seattle.
Yeah.
And this is I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory, right? Because I don't think the Browns are like conspiring to cover this up, but I do think that either like Andy Dickerson, like something happened with him behind the scenes where he just cannot, like if this game ends on Sunday and Andy Dickerson gets fired like 12 minutes after the game, we now know what happened, right? Like there was some kind of moment of no return there. But it could also be that Andy Dickerson is kind of the co-offensive coordinator with Ken Dorsey, and that takes a lot of his attention. There's a lot of different answers to what is going on with Andy Dickerson, but I think at this point it's fair to ask the question.
Yeah.
Where was Andy Dickerson?
Right? What's happening? Yeah. Where is he? And what exactly? Because I think you're absolutely right. I think what how they aligned the staff has morphed and changed through this year because they've been searching for answers, and we really have no idea who's in charge of what right now.
And I imagine like that happens a lot.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like I remember last year was happening where like I think it wasn't Alex Van Pelt that was the quarterback's coach. It was like somebody else, like a quality control coach that like stepped in and did that. And it's fine when you're winning, right? I think this this is normal, right? Things change, responsibilities go. I mean, at any workplace, right? What your job is might change based on what is required in order for the workplace to work.
Priorities change. Absolutely.
Like you might have to pull double duty, or somebody else steps into a role, your role changes. So I don't want to paint this out like, I think anytime we see something that's like peculiar, there is this immediate instinct to paint it as dysfunction. What I read from that article is that this is not a dysfunctional situation. This is just a situation that had a lot of things go wrong on the football field, right? And like we can see, like offensive line got old, the quarterback was horrible, like horrific during the season, and all of these things kind of added on top of each other to put you in the spot that you did. And I think it's going to speak volumes, the kind of moves that they make following the end of the season. That will tell us a lot about where their postmortem took them, because we now have some of these questions out in the open, and we're going to see what the answers to these questions are.